Hey everyone, welcome back to HFI Covenant. My name is Jennifer and I'll be narrating today's story. This is a completely original human-written work of science fiction. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's jump right in. The storm had teeth, not metaphorically. The silicon particulate on Caris 4 came in at roughly 200 kilometers per hour during a full scouring event. And the individual grains, silica fused with trace iron oxide deposits from the planet's ancient volcanic shelf, were sharp enough to strip polymer coating off a standard-issue survival suit in under 4 minutes. I knew this because I'd been watching the readout on my left forearm panel tick downward since I dove behind the first rock formation I could find. And the numbers weren't lying. 3 minutes, 42 seconds of exposure remaining before the outer layer failed. The storm was going to last another 6 hours. I did the math. The math was bad. My name is Daniel Lawson, and I've operated in hostile environment theaters for 11 years. Meridian deserts, the ice flats of Corvus Station, the acidic shallow seas of Pellerin Bay. I've learned that the galaxy's hostile environments share one common feature. They don't care who you are or what your contract says. They're just physics, doing physics things, without malice or mercy. Caris 4's desert didn't hate me. It was just very efficiently trying to kill me. I pressed myself into the lee side of a rock spire and assessed. The formation gave me perhaps 40 degrees of protection, enough to slow the strip rate but not stop it. To the east, maybe 60 meters through the howling ochre murk, I could see a shape. I'd clocked it 2 minutes ago during a brief lull in the storm's intensity. A biocactus, a Caresian native growth, sometimes called a bladder plant by off-worlders. They grew enormous here. This one was maybe 9 meters tall, 3 meters wide at its widest, and their interiors were hollow water storage chambers kept pressurized and humid by the plant's metabolic processes. People survived in them. Occasionally, there were records. The problem was the 60 meters of open ground between me and the plant. I checked my suit, 3 minutes, 20 seconds. The problem was also that biocacti on Caris 4 had a fibrous outer shell roughly 22 centimeters thick at full maturity, composed of a lignin-silica hybrid that most cutting tools bounced off of. The plants had evolved that shell specifically because the same storms trying to kill me had been sandblasting this planet for the last 40 million years. I had a combat knife, 12-centimeter blade, tungsten carbide edge, not the kind of tool the mission loadout specifications had anticipated needing for plant surgery. 3 minutes, I ran. The storm hit me like a wall of grinding glass. My suit's environmental seals shrieked with the load. I kept my head down, one arm up to protect the faceplate, and I ran in the way you learn to run when the ground is uncertain and the air is hostile, and stopping is death. Not fast, not elegant, sustainable, mechanical. 1 foot, then the other, burning lungs and the hard certainty that this was survivable because the alternative was unacceptable. 58 meters. The biocactus loomed up out of the murk, and I nearly ran face first into its shell. I caught myself with both palms, felt the grit howling past me at enough velocity to draw blood on exposed skin, and pressed myself against the plant's windward side. 2 minutes, 11 seconds of suit integrity remaining. I pulled my knife. The technique I'd read about, buried 3 pages deep in a Caresian survival manual I'd downloaded before the mission, was to find the junction points between the shell's growth plates, like scales. Like the seams in armor, the shell grew in overlapping sections, and at the seam points the fibrous material was thinner, less reinforced. You couldn't cut through the main body, but the seams worked with patience and the right angle. I found a seam, drove the knife point in, felt it catch. 1 minute, 50 seconds. I worked the blade, levered it, applied lateral pressure at the base of the seam where the root growth would be softest. The plant made a sound, low, almost subsonic, a groan of biological protest, and I felt the shell give fractionally. I drove my shoulder into it, drove my knee up against the lower edge and shoved, using my legs rather than my arms because my legs are stronger, because that's just physics. The seam cracked. The crack widened. Humid air, warm, thick, smelling of biological processes and trace mineral water, gushed out against my face. I shoved my knife into the gap and levered hard, popping the plate loose and the hole that opened was roughly 60 centimeters across. Not graceful. Enough. I went in head first, pulling my legs behind me, sealing the breach with my body as I fell into dim, wet darkness. 1 minute, 3 seconds of suit integrity remaining. I hit the interior floor of the Cactus, soft, fibrous material, damp, and lay there for a moment listening to the storm howl outside and the plants settle around the damage I'd done to it. The interior was larger than I'd expected, roughly cylindrical, maybe 2.5 meters across, with walls that glowed faintly bioluminescent, pale green, enough to see by. The humidity was staggering. After the arid hell outside, the air felt almost liquid. I sat up. There was someone already inside. Expression I couldn't immediately classify. Not fear, exactly. More like the expression of someone who has been very carefully not moving for a very long time and is now recalculating whether that strategy still applies. Look of something purpose-built, not look of something purpose-built, not decorative. Panels and seams that spoke of function, of thermal management, of engineering. The suit was damaged. There was a long scoring mark along her left side, the material partially compromised. And beneath it I could see her skin glowing faintly amber in a way that matched her eyes. We looked at each other for approximately 3 seconds. "Human," she said. Her voice was melodic, even in a single word, with harmonics I couldn't quite place, like 2 notes played simultaneously. "Last I checked," I said. I scanned the space, habitual, automatic. No other occupants, no obvious exits besides the one I'd made. No weapons visible on her, though the suit had pockets I couldn't account for. "You've been in here a while." It wasn't a question. The interior of the Cactus showed signs of extended habitation, a cleared space, what looked like a very careful rationing setup, with collected moisture beading on small collection surfaces she'd built from pieces of her own equipment. She'd been here before the storm, maybe well before. 4 of your standard days, she said. You cut in from the south-southwest junction. I calculated a 17% probability of successful entry on that approach. You succeeded. She paused. You are bleeding. I checked. The storm had caught my left forearm during the run, a section of suit that had already taken damage earlier in the mission before the scouring event. A half-dozen superficial lacerations. Nothing serious. I'll manage, I said. I looked at her suit, at the damaged section. You're venting thermal, I processed this. That's why you're in here. The plant's biological output masks your heat signature. Her amber eyes brightened fractionally. Yes, partially. She seemed to be making a decision. My suit's thermal regulation has been compromised. Without the plant's ambient output to mask my own, I am visible to certain kinds of observation. Someone's looking for you. Yes. With thermal sensors. Among other things. I looked at the breach I'd made in the shell. The plant's biology was already beginning to respond. I could see the fibrous material slowly contracting around the gap, the plant attempting to seal its wound. Within an hour, maybe 2, it would be resealed enough to stop the storm getting in. That was good. It was also bad, because in sealing the breach, the plant would begin normalizing the interior thermal environment. And whatever masking effect the plant's output had been providing might change in ways I couldn't predict. Your entry caused a pressure differential, she said, as if reading my reasoning. And a heat spike. The breach itself, the sudden intake of hot exterior air mixed with my own thermal output, created a signature, I finished. A significant one. I have been very careful for 4 days. Her voice shifted slightly, something underneath the clinical tone. Your arrival may have undone that care. I thought about the mission parameters I'd come here with. Reconnaissance, primarily. Survey the ruins of a pre-syndicate research installation in the Glass Barrens, 50 miles northeast. No contact protocols in effect. No complications. I looked at the glowing woman in the damaged biosuit, sitting in a cactus in the middle of a sandstorm on a hostile environment world, carefully rationing moisture with improvised collection systems, hiding from something with thermal sensors. What are they using, I asked, to look for you? Syndicate drone swarms, Tier 3 atmospheric units. Each one carries a thermal spectrometer accurate to 0.3 degrees variance at 200 meters altitude. They sweep in overlapping hexagonal patterns. She paused. When you breach the plant, the spike would have registered as anomalous, even through the biological masking. They will have flagged it. How long before they vector a physical team to the flag? In this storm, she considered. The drones cannot fly in scouring conditions, but they will have logged the coordinates. When the storm breaks, she stopped. How long does the storm last? Historically, scouring events of this magnitude on Keras 4 last between 4 and 8 of your standard hours. I checked my internal chronometer. The storm had started approximately 90 minutes ago. So we have between 2.5 and 6.5 hours before they can put drones back up, I said. And then another window before a ground team reaches this position. If they have a forward base in the region, the ground team could be here within 30 minutes of the storm breaking. I ran the numbers. They were bad, but bad in a workable way. Where are you trying to get to? I asked. She looked at me carefully. Why? Because you've been hiding for 4 days, and your suit is damaged, and whatever you're doing here, you haven't managed to do it alone. And because whoever's looking for you just got a beacon pointing at this exact plant. I met her glowing eyes steadily. So where are you trying to go? A long pause. The storm screamed outside. The plant groaned softly. There is an extraction point, she said. Northeast, 53 miles. The Glass Barrens, exactly where I was going anyway. What's waiting at the extraction point? A ship, a pilot, someone who is not syndicate. She hesitated. Someone I was separated from during the initial pursuit. I thought about my mission parameters. The survey could wait. The ruins had waited 300 years. They'd wait a little longer. My name is Daniel Lawson, I said. Tell me yours. Ilyxendra, she said. The name had extra syllables in her pronunciation, harmonics that my human hearing probably missed. You may call me Ilyx if the full form is difficult. Ilyxendra works. I started taking stock of my equipment. Let's talk about how we're getting you 53 miles across the Glass Barrens with a syndicate team on our tail. I didn't notice it at first, the moment I started planning. The way her amber eyes tracked me with something that wasn't quite wonder and wasn't quite confusion, but sat somewhere between the two. She watched me like you'd watch something that shouldn't exist, working through implications she hadn't accounted for. Later, she would tell me that in the 4 days she'd been alone in that cactus, she had calculated and recalculated every possible outcome for her situation. Every scenario had ended the same way. She hadn't factored in a human. We heard the first drone's ranging ping, muffled through the storm but unmistakable. Approximately 40 minutes later, the drone ping was a ranging signal, not a targeting solution. Passive emissions from the syndicate unit, bouncing off terrain features, building a topographic map for post-storm navigation, automated. Not necessarily a direct response to our breach, but I wasn't counting on that. Tell me about the ground team, I said. While the storm raged, I was laying out my equipment in the bioluminescent green light, taking inventory with the deliberate calm that good field work requires. What am I dealing with? Numbers and hardware. The standard syndicate recovery unit is 6 to 8 operators, Ilyxendra said. She'd move slightly, watching my hands as I worked. At minimum, 1 tracker unit, insectoid genus, 4 limbs, specialized thermal vision apparatus, very difficult to deceive, and at least 1 heavy asset. A pause. The heavy units carry personal kinetic barriers, projected force field technology. I know what kinetic barriers are, I said. They deflect directed energy, she continued, almost as if she hadn't heard me. Plasma, laser, high-energy particle streams. The barrier projector reads the incoming energy signature and generates a precisely tuned counterfield. It is nearly impenetrable to standard combat weapons. Nearly, I said. She looked at me. You say that word as if it means something specific to you. I picked up one of my remaining rounds. I had 37 left, after the mission ingress had gone sideways, and held it up so she could see it in the dim light. Standard 7.62 millimeters. Brass casing, lead core, copper jacket. Heavier than comparable energy weapon projectiles, by a factor of roughly 11. A kinetic barrier reads energy signatures, I said. Calibrated to counter electromagnetic and particle beam threats. It doesn't read mass very well. I set the round down. A piece of metal moving at 400 meters per second doesn't have an energy signature. The barrier can parse until after it's already hit. Ilyxendra stared at the bullet. That's old, I said. Yeah, the whole galaxy moved past it 300 years ago. Every species with spaceflight figured out directed energy and never looked back. Nobody runs kinetic weapons anymore. I picked up my rifle, checked the action. Except humans, and we kept them because we're stubborn and because they work. The barrier will still provide some protection. The barrier wasn't designed for kinetic impacts. It'll absorb part of the energy, but not like it absorbs a plasma bolt. The physics are different. I set the rifle aside. Don't worry about the heavy, I'll deal with the heavy. She was quiet for a moment. How do you plan to deal with the tracker? The thermal vision units are accurate. It will see you through walls. Yeah, let's talk about that. The storm broke earlier than projected. 4 hours, 20 minutes. We heard the silence come in waves. The wind dropping, the sand howl fading, the terrible grinding cacophony of the scouring event retreating toward the horizon like a tide going out. The bio-cactus, which had been creaking and flexing under the storm's pressure, went still. In the quiet, the sound of the plant's internal biology was audible. Low liquid gurgles, cellular processes, the faint chemical language of a living thing going about its business. I'd used the storm time well. The approach to the bio-cactus from the southeast was through a channel between rock formations, a natural funnel that any tactical team would use to approach the position. I'd identified it through Ilyxendra's description of the terrain and my own survey of the breach point's geometry. The funnel was approximately 12 meters wide at its narrowest, and threaded between 2 spires of Corinthian basalt, each one roughly 4 meters tall. The spires had loose capstone formations. I'd noticed them during my ingress run. I'd spent 45 minutes working by feel through the breach I'd made and extending my reach with a long strip of the cactus's inner fibrous material, twisted into a rope-like tool, dislodging the capstones from their positions and balancing them. Not knocking them loose, balancing them, the way you'd balance a coin on edge, technically stable, but responsive to the right kind of disturbance. The disturbance I had in mind was sound. More specifically, a shot from my rifle into the base of the left spire, where a fracture line I'd identified in the basalt would transmit the vibration up through the rock in a predictable wave pattern. It wasn't a trap requiring exotic materials or syndicate-level technology. It was a rock, falling. Because gravity is free and universal, and it doesn't care about your personal kinetic barrier. Ilyxendra had watched this preparation with an expression I was starting to recognize. That particular quality of attention she gave to things she was reprocessing against prior assumptions. You are thinking in terms of mass and acceleration, she said, not energy. I'm thinking in terms of what I have available, I said, which is rocks, gravity, and 37 rounds. You're thinking like a planet, she said, almost to herself. Like something that has been fighting gravity its whole life. I didn't fully understand what she meant by that yet. The ground team came 40 minutes after the storm broke, 6 operators, as Ilyxendra had predicted. I watched them from a crack in the cactus shell, through the rifle's optic. The tracker came first. Tall, spindly, 4 arms, 2 folded against its thorax, 2 extended with scanning equipment. Its head was a narrow insectoid wedge, its visual apparatus replaced by a complex thermal imaging unit that glowed faintly orange in the desert morning. It moved with the particular confidence of something that has never lost a target it could see. It moved through the funnel. I waited until the heavy came through, massive, reptilian, built like something that had decided being large was a valid life philosophy. I could see the kinetic barrier projector on its belt, shimmering faintly, active. It walked like it was invincible because it mostly was. I put the shot into the fracture line of the left spire. The sound was enormous in the post-storm quiet. The fracture propagated up through the basalt in a wave I could see. A line of dust jumping from the rock face, moving upward, and the capstone, which had been balanced with 45 minutes of patient leverage work, simply leaned over and fell. 300 kilograms of basalt from 4 meters up. The kinetic barrier flared to its maximum output as the rock hit it. The projector reading something wrong, trying to parse an impact type it had never been calibrated for. generating a counterfield that was tuned for directed energy and was therefore approximately 40% less effective than advertised against a rock. The heavy went down, not dead. I hadn't expected dead from one impact. And dead wasn't necessarily the goal. The barrier had absorbed enough of the kinetic energy to prevent that, but the projector itself, taking a direct impact from an unfamiliar source, sparked and failed. The barrier was down. The rest was fieldcraft. 2 shots, 2 operators. The tracker dove for cover, faster than I'd expected. Reflexes like something evolved to be frightened, and bought itself 30 seconds. The remaining 3 operators scattered, taking up defensive positions behind rock formations, calling for fire support that wasn't there yet. I was already moving. The breach in the cactus shell had been resealed by the plant's biology over the course of the storm, but not strongly. A shoulder charge from the inside popped it open again. I went out low, moving in the direction opposite to where the operators were looking, because that's the oldest game in the world, and it still works. I won't narrate every step of the next 8 minutes. Fieldwork isn't dramatic when you're doing it right. It's one decision at a time, one movement at a time, using terrain and the cognitive limits of people who are reacting instead of acting. The syndicate operators were good. They just weren't prepared for something that moved the way I moved and used what I used and thought in terms of mass and friction, and the specific leverage angles of a human body that had grown up on a world with a gravitational constant that makes everything harder. When it was done, I went back to the cactus. Ilyxendra was standing at the breach, watching me return. Her amber eyes moved across the scene behind me, then back to me. Her expression was the one I was starting to think of as her reclassification face. "You won," she said. "Neutralize the immediate threat," I corrected. "There'll be more. Let's move." "You did it with rocks and 3 shots." "4 shots. Let's move, Ilyxendra." She moved, stepping out of the cactus into the desert morning. Then she said something in her own language, soft and quick, like a calculation spoken aloud. Then, in galactic standard, "How many of your people are like you?" "About 8 billion, I said, "give or take." Another pause. Another reclassification. We moved northeast. An hour out from the cactus, the tracker found us. I'd expected it. The thermal vision unit had survived the engagement. I'd heard it moving during my exfil, fast and low, circling wide. It hadn't engaged. That told me something. It had orders to locate and track, not to engage independently. It was calling in position. The problem was Ilyxendra's suit. "How bad is the thermal leak?" I asked, not breaking stride. Without the cactus's ambient output to mask me, significant. She was moving well for someone who'd been hiding for 4 days. She had reserves she hadn't shown me yet. My thermal output when my suit is fully functional is approximately double that of a standard biological entity of my size. With the compromise in the left panel regulation circuit, she paused, checking something on her suit's wrist interface. "I am currently producing an output equivalent to a small combustion heat source. At 200 meters in clear conditions, the tracker will see me as a bright signature against the desert ambient. Can you reduce it?" "Not without accessing the regulation circuit manually, and I don't have the tools. And even at minimum output, She hesitated. "My physiology produces excess thermal energy. It is not a malfunction. It is what I am." I thought about this for a few steps. How close does something need to be to mask your signature? To my body would blend our signatures into my body, would blend our signatures in the tracker's visual field. The spectrometer distinguishes heat sources by spatial separation and temperature differential. A pause. If 2 heat sources are within... She worked the calculation, within 40 centimeters of each other, and one produces sufficient output to overlap the other's heat bloom. They'd read as one source, I said. One human-sized thermal signature. Yes, but a human body's thermal output is not. I've been running in combat kit across a desert, I said. My core temperature is elevated. My surface temperature is significantly elevated. I could feel it, the particular flush of sustained exertion, heat radiating off my skin in waves. "What's my surface temperature right now?" She looked at me, differently than before, clinically, precisely, as if she was actually reading me the way her suit could probably do. "Your face, approximately 38.2 degrees Celsius. Your torso through the armor plating, difficult to read, your exposed forearm. She referenced the laceration site, not yet sealed. Approximately 39.5 in the wound area. And you're running at what? My skin surface, at current regulation failure, 41.3 degrees Celsius and rising. So if I walk next to you very close, the temperature differential between us is about 2 degrees. The tracker's spectrometer would need to distinguish two heat sources separated by less than 20 centimeters, with a differential of approximately 2 degrees. She was running the math in her head, visibly. At this range, with atmospheric interference from residual storm particulate. She stopped walking. I stopped with her. She looked at me with her luminous eyes. It might work. It would require physical proximity. Yeah, I said. I figured. A beat. You are not troubled by this, she said. Not a question. I've been shot at, sandblasted, and I ran across a kill zone at dawn. Physical proximity to a person I'm trying to get to safety is the least complicated part of my morning. Something moved across her face. Something soft and slightly bewildered, like a door opening inward on a room she hadn't expected to find there. We walked close together after that, my right arm against her left shoulder, close enough that the residual heat of my exertion was a constant presence between us. I could feel her heat too, elevated, constant, like walking next to a warm fire. Not uncomfortable, almost pleasant in the desert's post-storm chill. You're what exactly? I asked. If you don't mind. You called yourself a living code. That is one way to describe it. She was quiet for a moment, choosing words. My species, the Velhari, are not originally from this region of the galaxy. We were made, engineered, very long ago by a civilization that no longer exists, for a purpose that was not ours. Her voice was careful, the melody in it going minor. I carry, encoded in my biology, in my thermal output specifically, a sequence. A biological data string. Every degree of my thermal variance is a character in a language that the original engineers built into my cellular structure. What does the sequence do? It is a key, she said, a trigger, for specific technologies that the ancient civilization left behind. She glanced at me. Technologies like the terraforming arrays on this planet, I filed that away. And the Syndicate wants the key. The Syndicate wants many things. They want the key to access the arrays. They want the arrays to... She stopped. To what? The terraforming arrays can be run in reverse, she said quietly. They were built to create life, to build atmospheric conditions suitable for biological development, to seed worlds and make them habitable. A pause. Run in reverse, they strip atmospheres. They take habitable worlds and render them glass. I let that sit for a moment. That's a weapon, I said. That is what the Syndicate intends, she said. Yes. We kept walking close together, our heat signatures blended in the tracker's distant amber eyes. Behind us, unseen but felt, the spindly figure of the tracker moved through the terrain, following, patient, systematic, its thermal vision showing one human-shaped blur, moving northeast, too warm to be entirely normal, not warm enough to be clearly alien. Confused, perhaps, but following. The first hour of walking was adjustment. The second hour was conversation. Ilyxendra talked, and I listened in the way I'd learned to listen over 11 years of work. Not passively, not aggressively, but with the specific quality of attention you develop when information has operational value and you need to hold all of it while also watching terrain and maintaining pace and planning for contingencies. She told me about the Velhari, an engineered species, the progenitor word for them translated roughly to living instruments. They'd been created to serve as biological interfaces for the progenitor civilization's most significant technologies. Each Velhari carried a different sequence, a different key. Ilyxendra's was specific to atmospheric management systems, terraforming arrays, weather control installations, the massive climate engines that the progenitors had built across hundreds of worlds. When the progenitors disappeared, 300,000 of your standard years ago, the Velhari were left without purpose, she said. We adapted, became our own people. The sequences still existed in our biology, but they were dormant, academic, A reminder of what we had been. Until someone discovered what the sequences could do, I said. Until the syndicate discovered the reverse function of the arrays, she corrected. They had been studying progenitor technology for decades. Standard archaeological work, initially. The weaponization application was a discovery. And when they understood what the arrays could do, they began looking for the keys. She paused. For us. How many of you have they found? And her voice went quiet. I am the last one who has not been retrieved. I absorbed this. Retrieved. That's the word they're using. It is the polite word, she said. The melody in her voice had gone very flat. The others of my people, those the syndicate has taken, are not operating the arrays voluntarily. I thought about what that meant. About what kind of facility you'd need to force a person to generate a specific thermal output sequence against their will. About what you'd have to do to a living instrument to make it play the song you wanted. The other Velhari, I said. Are they still? I don't know, she said. I have not known for 8 months. We walked in silence for a while. The Glass Barrens were beginning to show on the horizon, a distant shimmer, the peculiar optical quality of terrain where the ground surface had been fused by ancient geological events into a vast field of crystalline material that caught the light and scattered it in every direction. Beautiful from a distance, extremely unpleasant to traverse. Ilyxendra, I said. I need to understand something. Ask. When we reach the extraction point, when your pilot gets you off this rock, what's the plan? You go into hiding again? Because the syndicate knows your face, your heat signature. There is a research station, she said. Off-world. People who are trying to understand the progenitor arrays, not to weaponize them, to neutralize them. To find a way to close the arrays so that the syndicate's keys become useless, she paused. They need a living Velhari to study, to map the sequence, to understand how the arrays respond to it, so they can build a countermeasure. So you go to them, they map you, and suddenly the syndicate's weapon doesn't work. In theory, yes. And you trust these people. I trust my pilot. He has kept me alive for 6 months before I was separated from him. A pause. He is waiting at the extraction point. I have to believe he is still waiting. I thought about the 51 miles still ahead of us, and the tracker behind us, and whatever additional assets the syndicate was scrambling right now in response to the news that their ground team had been neutralized by a single human with rocks and 3, 4 shots. Okay, I said. Then let's get you there. She looked at me sideways. Why? You have your own mission. You came here for the ruins. I could tell from your bearing, from your approach direction. 50 miles northeast. The pre-syndicate installation. I hadn't told her that. She'd read it from my direction of travel and calculated. I filed that under things to remember about her. The ruins will wait, I said. The other Velhari won't. Another moment of the reclassification expression. Then she said very quietly, Your species is very strange, Daniel Lawson. I've heard that before, I said. The Glass Barrens were worse than the map suggested. The surface was fused silica, essentially a vast natural sheet of glass, irregular and jagged, like someone had shattered a mirror the size of a continent and let the pieces settle. The shards varied in size from fine gravel to slabs 2 meters across, all of them razor-edged, all of them reflecting the desert sun in 1,000 directions simultaneously. Walking on it was like walking on a field of broken mirrors with a light show designed to blind you. It also transmitted heat like a griddle. How is your suit holding? I asked. The thermal regulation failure is worsening, Ilyxendra said. She was moving carefully, picking her steps, but there was a tension in her movements now that hadn't been there in the desert flats. The glass surface is radiating absorbed heat upward. My suit's ambient sensors are overwhelmed. I cannot tell where my own output ends and the environment begins. Good. That means the tracker has the same problem. She looked at me. You chose this route deliberately, knowing the Glass Barrens would confuse thermal signatures. Knowing they'd make tracking harder, yeah. I held out my hand as she navigated a particularly treacherous shard field. She took it without hesitation, practical, not tentative. The downside is the terrain. The terrain was punishing. The shards were too irregular to stride across and too variable to develop a rhythm. Every step required assessment. The reflected light was a constant assault. I'd pulled my visor down, and it still felt like staring into a welding arc. The heat radiating up from the glass surface drove the ambient temperature around us to something I didn't want to check the number on. 2 miles in, Ilyxendra stumbled. It wasn't dramatic, just a moment of her step failing, her weight going wrong, the particular stumble of exhaustion meeting difficult terrain. I caught her, reflexive, my arm around her shoulders, taking her weight, steadying. For a second her full temperature hit me. Through my gear, through the distance that professional courtesy usually maintained, I felt how hot she actually ran, not painful but remarkable. Like holding your hand near a fire, like the warmth was alive. "I can walk," she said. "I know you can," I said. "But you don't have to." She looked at me. Then she seemed to do a specific kind of calculation, not the tactical arithmetic I'd seen her do before, but something more personal, more uncertain. 4 days in the Cactus, she said. I ate very little. I conserved. "I know," I said. I adjusted my grip, taking more of her weight. She was lighter than she looked, which probably meant she was denser than she looked. The biosuit had mass. "I've got you." We continued. I carried more of her weight than she probably realized, subtly, not obviously. Adjusting my pace to hers and leaning slightly into her when the terrain required it, using the mass differential to compensate. It's a thing you learn to do. Not charity, not performance, just the practical application of having more physical resource than the person next to you and sharing it without making it into a thing. She noticed, though. She was too observant not to notice. "You are doing this deliberately," she said, a mile later. "Doing what?" "Compensating. You are walking in a way that bears more of the terrain difficulty than your path technically requires. You are smoothing the walk for me, without saying anything." "Terrain management," I said. "Standard." A pause. "For whom?" I didn't answer that. The Barrens required attention. But 3 miles later, in a brief rest behind a slab of fused glass, tall enough to give us cover, when her head tilted back against the glass, and her eyes closed for 30 seconds, and her breathing evened out in the shallow way of someone who's very tired letting go for just a moment. I kept watch over the approach lines and the broken mirror world around us, and felt the warmth radiating from her, and thought that the universe was a stranger and more interesting place than most of my mission briefings had led me to believe. Her eyes opened after 30 seconds, exactly. They found me immediately. "They're closer," she said. "The tracker. I can feel the ranging signals. My suit picks them up." "How close?" 2 miles, moving faster than we are." "Of course it is," I said. "It doesn't need to be careful on this terrain. Insectoid articulation, 6 points of contact, distributed weight. It'll skim across this like it was designed for it." I stood. "Then we don't stop again." I held my hand down to her. She looked at it for a moment, that brief pause of recalculation, and then took it. And we moved on across the broken glass world. 2 bodies throwing one heat shadow. 51 miles becoming 47, becoming 43. Becoming a number I was keeping track of, like a man counting ammunition. 1 mile at a time, making it mean something. We heard the dropship at mile 31, a heavy syndicate tactical transport, coming in low from the northwest. The sound came before the visual, a deep rhythmic percussion that the glass terrain amplified and scattered, making it impossible to triangulate until it was very close. It set down 2 miles ahead of us and to the east, behind a ridgeline. Establishing a blocking position, they were trying to get ahead of us. "They've committed a larger asset," Ilyxendra said. She was reading something on her suit's wrist display, and her voice had gone very still. "That transport carries, at minimum, a full tactical complement. 12 operators, multiple heavies." "Multiple barriers," I said. "Yes." I surveyed the terrain. Ahead of us, the Glass Barrens rose toward a ridge of Corinthian basalt, the same ancient volcanic geology that formed the spires I'd used earlier. The ridge was maybe a kilometer long, running roughly perpendicular to our direction of travel. To get past the dropship's blocking position, we had to cross the ridge, which meant a choke point, which was exactly where they wanted us. I looked around for what I had. The Glass Barrens themselves, razor shards, fused surface, the constant reflected light, the basalt ridge ahead. And there, running along the base of the ridge, a remnant of ancient topography, a dry channel, the kind cut by water that hadn't flowed in 10,000 years, maybe 8 meters wide, 3 meters deep, filled with accumulated glass sand from the storm. "Tell me about the barriers again," I said. "The exact operating principle." The projector reads incoming energy signatures and generates a counterfield tuned to the specific signature's frequency and magnitude. The response time is approximately 0.2 milliseconds, faster than any ballistic in standard use. She paused. "Except yours." "What happens when the projector field is disrupted? Physically, if the projector itself is moved very fast," she thought. "The field projection requires a stable emitter position. If the projector is displaced," she worked through it, "the field would destabilize momentarily, for perhaps half a second, while the system recalibrates to the new position." Half a second. I looked at the dry channel. I looked at the ridge above it. I looked at the heavy cable sling that was wrapped around my pack. 40 meters of high-tensile recovery line, rated to 3,000 kilograms, that I'd brought for the ruined survey work. "I need you to be ready to run when I tell you to run," I said. "Fast and low, straight for the ridge." "What are you going to do?" "Physics," I said. The syndicate team was positioned exactly where I'd expected, along the ridge crest, with 2 heavies establishing a fire base, and the remaining operators spread in a standard suppression arc. Good tactical positioning. They expected us to approach uphill into their fire. They didn't expect me to approach the dry channel from below their position, running at full speed with 40 meters of high-tensile cable trailing behind me. The cable's other end was attached to the largest single shard of fused glass I'd found in the Barrens. A slab, roughly 1 meter across and 6 centimeters thick, edges like a guillotine, mass approximately 90 kilograms. I'd rigged it on a sliding surface, balanced at the edge of the channel. When I ran past the trigger point and the cable snapped taut, the slab came off the edge. It didn't fly. Gravity isn't that dramatic. It fell swinging on the cable's arc, sweeping in a lateral pendulum motion along the channel floor, fast, heavy, and at an angle that brought it up and into the firing position from below and behind. The first heavy's kinetic barrier read the incoming mass. Eventually, the projector fired, the counterfield deployed. But a 90-kilogram slab of fused glass, moving at the speed of a pendulum at full arc, doesn't care about a 0.2 millisecond response time in the same way a laser bolt does. By the time the barrier was fully active, the slab had already reached the projector unit, not the field, the unit itself. The impact was a physical displacement, not an energy transfer. Half a second of recalibration, 4 shots, 3 hits. The suppression arc collapsed. The remaining operators fell back in good order. They were professionals, but falling back through difficult terrain under fire from below while managing their injured gives a single motivated person with a good eye and 31 rounds a working window. I used the window. "Run," I said into the comm unit I'd set up with Ilyxendra. "Go." She ran. The Carician desert didn't stay warm after dark. The same properties that made it a furnace during the day. The sparse atmosphere, the low humidity, the glass reflective surface that absorbed and re-emitted solar energy with maximum efficiency, made it a cold trap after sunset. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 90 minutes. By full dark, with 22 miles still to go, the cold was a genuine threat. We were sheltering in a rock formation, not a cactus, just a natural overhang, out of the wind. While I dressed the wound I'd taken during the ridge skirmish, a ricochet from a barrier deflection, not a direct hit, but the fragment had taken a piece of my right shoulder, and the blood loss, though slow, needed a dressing. "I can help with that," Ilyxendra said. "I've got it. Your dominant hand is compromised. The angle of your left arm is insufficient to seal the posterior wound correctly." She moved before I could object, sitting behind me, taking the field dressing from my hands with a practicality that didn't leave room for argument. Her fingers on the wound were warm, genuinely warm, the elevated temperature of her biology present in every point of contact. "This may scar," she said, working efficiently. "Most things do," I said. A pause, the sound of the night desert, not silent actually. The glass terrain expanded and contracted as it cooled, producing subtle, continuous cracking sounds across a broad frequency range, almost musical if you were in the right frame of mind. "You have many scars," she said. Observation, not judgment. 11 years of fieldwork. Your species heals quickly. Another pause. Comparatively, for a species without regenerative biology, your healing rate is remarkable. We're stubborn, I said. It's a theme. She tied off the dressing. Her hands remained on my shoulders for a moment longer than strictly necessary, not dramatically. Just the natural hesitation of someone finishing a task and not immediately pulling away. Her warmth was present through the material of my shirt. May I ask you something, she said. Go ahead. Why does it not? She paused. You have been in physical danger continuously since you found me. You have been injured. The thermodynamic conditions on this planet have been actively hostile to your biology for the entire time we have been traveling. And yet you do not seem distressed. You plan, you act, you rest when it is possible to rest. There is no apparent... She searched for the word. Despair. No collapse. How? I thought about it. I don't know that I can explain it in a way that translates, I said. We've always lived like this. Humans, I mean. Our whole evolutionary history is struggling with an environment that was trying to kill us and finding a way through. We don't have the best sensory apparatus, or the best physical defense, or the regenerative biology. What we have is... I searched. Pattern recognition. The ability to see a problem and find a solution that the problem didn't anticipate. And the stubbornness to keep doing that after the previous solution didn't quite work. It seems exhausting, she said, softly. Sometimes, I said. But there's something clarifying about it. When the problem is immediate and physical, and there's a clear metric for success, you're alive or you're not. Everything else falls away. It's almost peaceful. She moved around to sit beside me, her back against the same rock face, her shoulder a few centimeters from mine. The warmth of her presence in the cold night was not subtle. I have spent 8 months running, she said. It has not felt peaceful. You've been running alone, I said. That's different. She looked at me. The amber light of her eyes was the brightest thing in our shelter, and in it I could see the weight of 8 months as a biological weapon trying not to be found and used. The 4 days in the cactus, the careful rationing, the constant calculation of outcomes, all arriving at the same terminal point. You said my species was strange, I said. What does that mean to you, actually? She was quiet for a moment. You are imperfect in a way that should be debilitating, she said. You are fragile compared to most spacefaring species. Your bones break, your skin tears, your cellular repair rate is average at best. Your sensory range is limited. Your operational temperature window is narrow. Your psychology is volatile. You form attachments at a rate and depth that most species consider a liability. She paused. And yet, you cut into a cactus with a 12-centimeter knife and beat a syndicate strike team with rocks. You carry someone across a field of broken glass without saying anything. You explain yourself as if your logic is obvious, when it is not obvious. It is entirely particular to you. I didn't say anything. I have been a liability, she said. My entire existence has been a liability these past months. Something to be hidden, something to be moved, something to be kept from the people who want to use it. She looked at her own hands, the biosuit, the faint glow of her elevated temperature visible through the damaged left panel. You are the first person who has looked at me and seen something other than a problem to be managed. You're not a problem, I said. You're a person. The amber eyes held steady. Yes, she said, quietly. I am. We sat in the cold night with her warmth between us and the glass desert singing its thermal contraction song, and 22 miles of hostile terrain ahead of us. And something had shifted, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but with the particular permanence of a thing that becomes true once said and cannot be unsaid. They'd gotten ahead of us. The tracker had stayed with us across the Glass Barrens. I'd known it, had factored it into every movement choice, keeping our heat shadow merged and our path variable enough to deny easy interception. But the syndicate had resources I'd been accounting for only partially. A second asset, quiet, positioned, waiting at a natural choke point in the terrain 18 miles from the extraction point. The heavy that stepped out from behind the rock formation was larger than the one I'd dropped with the capstone. Almost 3 meters tall, plated with something that wasn't biological, augmented, either cybernetically or with attached armor elements that had been bolted to the original reptilian frame. Its barrier projector was a newer model, the emitter integrated into the chest plate, rather than mounted on the belt. Harder to displace. It had a weapon, too. A directed energy lance, built to the scale of something that large. The barrel alone was probably worth more than my entire equipment loadout. It spoke in galactic standard for the benefit of both of us. The biological asset will accompany me. The human will step aside. A pause. Or not. The outcome for the asset is identical in either case. Ilyxendra's hand found my arm. Not hiding behind me, she'd moved to my right, slightly forward, which was braver than it was tactically sound. "Don't," I said quietly. "Daniel. I need you to move left, 12 meters. Behind the secondary rock formation, you'll see at your 9 o'clock. I kept my voice even. "Do it now. When the engagement starts, keep moving. Don't stop." She looked at me. 8 months of running alone, 4 days in a cactus, 22 miles of broken glass and cold nights. "Come back," she said. "Yeah," I said. She moved. The heavy watched her go with the patience of something that knows she can't go far and isn't interested in the chase until the more pressing problem is dealt with. It turned its attention back to me. "Your kinetic weapons," it said, almost academically. "I have been briefed. The barrier compensates." "I know," I said. "That's not what I'm doing." What I was doing was bleeding. The shoulder wound from the ridge skirmish, dressed but not sealed. The field dressing doing its job but not perfectly, because field dressings never do their job perfectly, had been seeping steadily since the cold had set in. Not dangerous at current rate, but present. And the heavy's armor, the augmented plates, the barrier projector's integrated systems, was electronic. All of it. The barrier projector, the weapon, the targeting systems in that massive augmented frame. Carishian sand, as I may have mentioned, is silicon particulate with trace iron oxide. My blood mixed with enough of that particulate, which coated everything on this planet, was a reasonably effective conductive medium. Not ideal, not engineered. A thing I had available. I pressed my left hand against the shoulder wound, let it come away wet. Then I walked directly toward the heavy. It didn't expect that. Past me. Not because I was fast enough to pass me. Not because I was fast enough to dodge it. Because I'd angled the approach so that I was behind a secondary rock formation for the last 4 meters of the approach. And the shot went through the rock, and the blast pressure knocked me into the heavy, instead of away from it. Physical contact, bleeding hand. Conductive medium between my palm and the barrier projector's external surface. The short circuit was not dramatic. It was a pop. A small flash. The barrier projector's control circuit, bridged by a thin film of blood and silicon particulate, experiencing a voltage irregularity that the system's tolerances hadn't been designed to accommodate. The barrier went down. The heavy was still 3 meters tall and augmented and armored and very, very strong. What happened next took 3 minutes and left me with 2 cracked ribs, a gash along my right cheekbone, and the absolute bedrock certainty that the human body, when it has run out of better options, can take an extraordinary amount of punishment before it stops functioning. I don't recommend the experience. But I was standing at the end of it, the heavy was not. I collected myself, took inventory, decided that I was damaged but mobile, and that damaged mobile was sufficient, and walked in the direction Ilyxendra had gone. She found me first. She came around the rock formation at something close to a run, and she stopped when she saw my face, and her expression did something complicated and rapid that I couldn't fully track. "You're functional," I said. "Let's go. 18 miles. Her hands came up to my face, just for a moment, warm fingers, careful, touching the gash on my cheekbone, with a precision that suggested she was assessing, not comforting, but the two things were not entirely separate. "Functional," she repeated. In her voice, the word was both a question and a statement. "Functional," I confirmed. We went. The extraction point was a dry lake bed 3 miles across. Flat, featureless, the kind of terrain that offers no cover and no approach that isn't visible from a mile out. The ship was there, small, battered, the particular look of a vessel that has been repaired with whatever was available in whatever port was convenient. A smuggler's ship, a pilot's ship. The Syndicate dropship was also there. It had arrived ahead of us, probably called in by the tracker, which had maintained its trail through everything. The tactical transport was down on the lake bed, positioned between us and the extraction vessel, its ramp down, and 6 operators establishing a perimeter. A holographic display was active from the transport's command post, a cold, gray-skinned figure, gender indeterminate, with the specific quality of someone who conducts their cruelties from a safe distance. The Syndicate handler. Ilyxendra, the hologram said, its voice carrying across the flat lake bed with the clarity of good projection equipment. You have performed beyond our modeling parameters. We are impressed, but the outcome remains unchanged. You will come with us. The human will be compensated for his time. I looked at the 6 operators. The dropship itself. The distance to the extraction vessel, maybe 400 meters past the transport. Ilyxendra stood beside me. I could feel her heat. Daniel, she said quietly, the dropship. If we can reach the other side of it, use it as cover, the pilot can execute a short liftoff and reposition to our location. He has been watching. A pause. He will be ready. I looked at the dropship. Standard Syndicate tactical transport. Hull was ceramic composite. Hard to breach with conventional means. But the ramp was down. The ramp was down because they'd deployed in a hurry and hadn't bothered to fully secure the vehicle. How quickly can your pilot move? I asked. Nervin is... A soft note in her voice. Affection, relief at the name. He is many things, and brave is not always the first of them. But he is an exceptional pilot. Give me 90 seconds, I said, then tell him to move. What are you... I was already running, not toward the perimeter, through it, straight at the nearest operator, angling for the gap between the 2nd and 3rd positions in their spread, running at a pace that said this is not stopping, adjust, or be adjusted. 2 shots, suppression, not precision, forcing the perimeter to contract inward. And then I was through the gap and at the dropship's ramp and going up it at full speed. The interior of the Syndicate tactical transport was exactly like every Syndicate facility I'd read about in mission briefings. Clean, functional, over-engineered. I found the cockpit in 6 seconds. Found the primary control interface in 3 more. I didn't know how to fly it. That wasn't the plan. The plan was the emergency pressure release valve on the atmospheric stabilization system. Every large atmospheric vessel has one. A safety mechanism for venting excess internal pressure during certain types of drive failures. On Syndicate vessels, it was located on the primary control panel, labeled in galactic standard. I hit it. The lateral venting ports on the ship's hull, 12 of them, distributed around the vessel's equator, all fired simultaneously, not violently, just a sustained high-pressure gas release in a horizontal pattern that extended 30 meters from the hull in every direction. Enough to knock 6 operators off their feet. 90 seconds. Now, I said, into the comm. The extraction vessel, Nervin had been watching, had understood before I'd finished the word, was already lifting, not high. A 3-meter hover, repositioning across the lake bed at low altitude, skimming over the disoriented Syndicate perimeter. Ilyxendra ran. I went out the ramp at full speed, hit the ground, kept running. The Syndicate operators were recovering. They were good, and the venting hadn't hurt them, just interrupted them, and fire was resuming. The ground around me was jumping with energy impacts. The extraction vessel's ramp was down and moving. Nervin, I caught a glimpse of him through the ramp hatchway, slight, feathered, with the wide eyes of something built for prey, and the expression of someone who had committed to a course of action and was regretting every second of it. Had the ship at full hover thrust, 3 meters up, moving at walking speed. A ship doing walking speed is still a ship. Boarding a vehicle in motion is not a comfortable exercise. I made it with approximately half a second to spare, which in my experience is the best kind of making it. The ramp sealed behind me. I heard Ilyxendra's voice from somewhere forward. Urgent, commanding, the melodic quality of it gone fully clinical. Navigational instructions to Nervin. Altitude, heading, the particular calculated urgency of someone who has been planning this moment for 8 months. The ship lurched upward. Behind us, through the hull, I heard the Syndicate dropship's engines firing. Then I heard Nervin's voice, high and slightly panicked. saying several things in an avian dialect I didn't speak, and then in Galactic Standard. Syndicate transport is launching. We have approximately 40 seconds before they can achieve weapons lock. Can we break atmosphere in 40 seconds? Ilyxendra asked. No, Nervin said. Then what can we do in 40 seconds? A pause. Something I have never tried, Nervin said, and which I need both of you to be secured for. I found a crash harness, buckled it. What Nervin did in those 40 seconds, I will never be able to accurately describe in terms that honor the physics of it. He had been an exceptional pilot for a reason, and that reason was a relationship with the operating margins of a small atmospheric vessel that could charitably be called intimate and less charitably called insane. He flew us through the Syndicate transport's own atmospheric wake, using the larger ship's exhaust displacement to generate a lateral velocity that pushed us out of the weapons lock corridor, at an altitude of approximately 60 meters above the glass desert. The glass barrens below us flickered and flared with reflected light, 1,000 mirrors throwing the chaos of our passage back at the sky. We broke atmosphere. The Syndicate transport, designed for tactical deployment rather than pursuit, could not follow quickly enough to maintain targeting solutions through our exit vector. The research station was 3 days' travel from Chorus 4. Ilyxendra spent the first day sleeping, properly sleeping. The first time in 8 months, she'd been in a vessel she trusted, with people she trusted. I didn't see her for most of that day. I heard her once, through the thin partition of the vessel's sleeping quarters. Not speech, just the particular deep-breathed quiet of someone who has let their guard down entirely for the first time in a very long time. Nervin and I developed a comfortable silence. He brought me food that I couldn't identify but that tasted roughly like protein and salt, which was enough. He watched me with the wide, considering eyes of someone revising an estimate. She told me about the Glass Barrens, he said, eventually. Day 2. About how you carried her. Terrain management, I said. He made a sound that was probably the avian equivalent of a very skeptical hum. She said you never mentioned it. Never made it into something she should feel, what is the human word, beholden about. I needed her moving, I said. She moved. He watched me for another moment. In 6 months with her, I watched 17 people and 3 separate organizations fail to get her 50 miles. You did it in 2 days. A pause. While wounded. The terrain was complicated, I said, which was not modesty, just accuracy. He shook his head, a gesture he'd probably picked up from human interaction. It didn't seem native to his species, and went back to his navigation. She found me on the observation deck on the 3rd day. The planet Chorus 4 was long behind us, just a point of reflected light in the rear visual field. Ahead, the research station's beacon was a steady pulse on the navigation display. She sat beside me. She had changed out of the damaged biosuit into something less functional and more comfortable. Still high-necked, still deliberate in its coverage, but softer. The amber light of her eyes was the same as it had been in the Cactus, but the quality of it had shifted. Less calculation, more something else. I have been trying to understand something, she said. What's that? Why you stayed? She looked at her hands, then at the stars outside the viewport. You could have assessed the situation in the Cactus and determined that involvement was not strategically optimal. You came for the ruins, not for me. You had a mission. And I was... A pause. I was a complication. A significant complication, with syndicate-level resources arrayed against me. You were a person who needed help, I said. That's fairly simple. It is not simple at all, she said. For most species, the calculation of risk and reward would not produce that outcome. The risk was extreme. The reward, to you personally, was essentially zero. You gained nothing from helping me that you could not have gained more safely by walking away. I gained getting you out, I said. She looked at me. I'm not going to pretend that's philosophically uncomplicated, I said. I know there's something about humans, about the way we're wired, that makes the cost-benefit analysis come out differently than it does for most species. Maybe we're just bad at self-preservation. Maybe we have an irrational weighting toward the concrete and immediate, this person, right now in front of me, over the abstract and future. Maybe it's something that evolved on a world where survival was a group project, and abandoning a member of the group was a threat to everyone. Maybe, she said, or maybe it is something else. Like what? She was quiet for a moment. The stars moved slowly in the viewport. When I was in the Cactus, she said, I had run every possible scenario for my situation. Every path. Every branch of every decision tree. I am not boastful to say that my cognitive capacity is well above average for my species. I have run complex multivariable analysis as a survival skill for 8 months. A pause. Every scenario ended the same way. The syndicate was too close, the terrain too hostile, the distance too great, my suit too compromised. The math was not good. I know, I said. The math was bad. You did not know the math, she said. That was the thing. You did not come into the Cactus and run the analysis and decide that despite the odds you were going to try. You came in out of a sandstorm and found a complication and immediately began solving it. The math did not precede the action. The action came first. And the math was, she searched, along for the ride. I thought about this. Maybe, I said. Yeah, maybe that's it. It is terrifying, she said. Yeah, I said. I get that a lot. And beautiful, she said. That was quieter, said to the viewport rather than to me, in the way of someone making an admission they haven't fully processed yet. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to something true is to let it sit. We watched the stars for a while. The research station's beacon was growing steadier on the navigation display. 300,000 years of progenitor legacy, encoded in her biology, and 8 months of running from people who wanted to use her as a weapon, and 48 hours of broken glass and sandstorms and bad math, and she was here, alive, moving toward people who would help her make herself into something the syndicate couldn't weaponize, rather than something it could. When this is done, she said, and I noticed the when, not the if. When the researchers have what they need, and the arrays are neutralized, and my people? A slight catch in the melody of her voice. Whatever has happened to my people, I want to understand. Understand what? Humans, she said. I want to understand how you do it. How a species with every physical disadvantage, every cognitive complication, every irrational attachment and impulsive risk acceptance, and stubborn refusal to accept the math. She shook her head slowly. How you became apex. I thought about the Cactus, the rocks and the 4 shots, the Glass Barrens and the weight of her against my side, the cracked ribs and the blood that had shorted out a war machine's defenses. We didn't become apex because we were the best at any one thing, I said. We became apex because every time the math was bad, someone decided to do it anyway, and sometimes they died, and sometimes they didn't. And the ones who didn't taught their kids, and the kids tried things that were even more inadvisable. For a few 100,000 years, I paused. It's not a strategy, it's just a character trait, expressed persistently, over geological time. She turned to look at me. The amber light of her eyes was warm in the cabin's dim glow. A character trait, she repeated, expressed persistently. Yeah, like carrying someone across broken glass without mentioning it. Like that, I said. The research station's beacon pulsed, closer now. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. Warm, deliberate, not a calculation but a choice. The temperature differential between us was always going to be there. Her biology, her nature, the thermal output of a living key that had been engineered before either of our species had names. But the difference was smaller than the distance, and the distance was, for the moment, nothing at all. Thank you, Daniel Lawson, she said. Not for the carrying, not for the rocks or the 4 shots or the bad math. For all of it. For the 11 years of fieldwork that had made him the kind of person who comes in from a sandstorm and starts solving immediately. For the 8 billion people who had passed that character trait forward through geological time, one improbable decision at a time, until one of them cut into a cactus on a hostile planet and found someone who needed finding. Thank yourself, I said. You survived 4 days alone first. I considered. That's actually pretty impressive. The melody in her voice when she laughed, genuine laughter, surprised out of her, the first I'd heard, had harmonics I'd never encountered before, and probably wouldn't be able to describe accurately to anyone who asked. But I'd remember it. The ship flew on. The research station grew from a beacon to a shape against the stars. Somewhere behind us, on a glass desert planet, the syndicate was regrouping and recalculating, and the tracker was probably still walking patient hexagonal patterns across a lake bed where a ship had been and wasn't anymore. People who could help, work to be done, a weapon to be unmade, and 8 billion humans going about their ordinary improbable lives on a small planet with above-average gravity, completely unaware that one of them had just done, as far as the galaxy was concerned, a completely inexplicable thing. They never are aware. That might be the most human thing of all. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Thanks for taking the time to listen. I really